So 2020 has taken away a lot of things from us, including marriages. We've watched numerous celebrity marriages fall apart. Some might even know people whose marriages have fallen apart. Maybe the quarantine has got people thinking, hey, I don't really like you anymore. I don't have to stay with you. Let's go ahead and get divorced. But today on TXE Tells All, we're going to talk about, do you need a prenup before you get married? I would say yes, and we're going to talk about the reasons why. But before I get into what we came in for today, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, click that notification bell so that you're the first to see content we post every Sunday. So let's get into talking about divorce and prenuptial agreements. Let's take, for example, our first celebrity couple, Michael Jordan and his ex-wife, Vanita Vanoy Jordan. They had been married for over 18 years and had 3 children together. And Vanita Vanoy ended up walking away with over $100 million at the divorce settlement. And they had a prenuptial agreement. So people may wonder why she was able to actually walk away with so much money after the divorce. And so let's define what a prenuptial agreement is. A prenuptial agreement is actually an agreement made by a couple before they get married, and it concerns the ownership of their respective assets should the marriage fail. And it's an agreement that basically both parties can come up with, and they can put anything in the agreement except nothing illegal and nothing concerning child support or child custody. But other than that, you can put whatever you want in the agreement. You can try to contemplate what you want to contemplate in the future and have that as part of the agreement. And so obviously, Juanita and Michael Jordan contemplated certain things, and that's how she walked away with what she walked away with. Sometimes people get married and at the point of their marriage, they don't have any money, but they anticipated that they will be making more money in the future. And that's when you can put in there, hey, I have entitlement to certain future earnings as well. A lot of Michael Jordan's money came from his actual contracts with the NBA, but even more of it came from his endorsements with certain companies, most notably Nike. And so that's probably where a lot of the bulk of the money came from in the divorce settlement, even with the prenup. So let's talk about when you have a prenup and your spouse challenges the validity of the prenup when you decide to get divorced. Here's another celebrity couple, Dr. Dre and his wife, Nicole Young. They've also been married for a long time by celebrity standards or just by anybody's standards. I think they've been married almost 20 years. And his wife is actually challenging the validity of the contract, the prenuptial agreement. So in order for a prenuptial agreement, it has to be valid. You have to have in writing, it has to be voluntarily made and based on full disclosure of all your assets and debts. And so what Nicole Young is challenging is actually the voluntariness of the contract. She's saying that she made it under duress and therefore the contract should not be honored, and the divorce should be regulated by whatever the laws are of the state that they reside in. And so this brings into question a lot of things. There's a lot of money on the line, and she feels that it's worth it to challenge the validity of this particular prenuptial agreement. And so you want to make sure that you have an agreement that will withstand the test of time. Okay, so let's assume that you proceeded with the marriage without any prenuptial agreement. What happens as divorce? When you get divorced and things start to go awry, there may be contentious divorces, and you say, okay, we can't agree on anything. The state which you reside in controls how the property is divided, how the assets are divided. And so different states have different laws. There are states that have community property laws, which means while we were married, anything that we earned while we were married will be divided 50-50 upon divorce. It doesn't matter if one party made more than the other, it's going to be a 50-50 divide. And that's community property states. California and Texas are community property states. Then you have those other states that divide by equitable distribution. And equitable does not necessarily mean fair. Equitable distribution means that the judge will assess all the assets and debts and decide what the divide should be. So let's say a party stayed home with the children and that's the reason they did not work and make money. The judge will take that into consideration in regard to how the assets are divided. One party may be responsible for giving up more money than the other party because of equitable distribution. And so it might not seem fair, and it's definitely not a 50-50 split, But in equitable distribution states, one party can end up walking away even if they didn't necessarily earn what the other party earned during the course of the marriage. Okay, let's look at our next celebrity couple, Ray J and Princess Love. So this couple's courtship, very rocky courtship, was detailed on a television show. They had a very rocky courtship. He still ended up proposing to Princess Love. And before they got married, his mother was adamant about him getting a prenuptial agreement. I guess she didn't have faith in the marriage working out long term because of their rocky history. And she wanted to make sure that Ray J protected his assets and everything that he had worked for up until that point. Princess Love did not appreciate that his mother interfered, and she was very resistant to signing the prenuptial agreement. But in the end, she ended up signing the agreement. What happens when you have a prenuptial agreement, you want to make sure that you each have your own attorneys look at the prenuptial agreement. One attorney cannot represent the interests of both parties. It's impossible to say, hey, I want to represent this party and represent this party and make sure I get the best agreement. So you have your attorney draft the agreement, and then you have your spouse's attorney review the agreement and add to it or remove certain things that they feel like is not in their client's best interest. And that's what Princess Love did. Before they got married, she ended up signing an agreement that squared away certain assets that she felt like she wanted to keep and certain assets that Ray J wanted to keep, and basically outline these things before the end when things can get really contentious and people are sitting across from the table from each other saying this person is crazy. Okay, so let's talk about the top 5 reasons why people get divorced. Money is number 1, infidelity, constant arguing, lack of intimacy, and substance abuse. These are the top 5 reasons. Of course, people get divorced for other reasons, such as, we grew apart, or family interfering, things of that nature. But those are the top reasons why people get divorced in the United States. Okay, and sometimes what you'll see is that people put an infidelity clause in their prenuptial agreement. Meaning, okay, if we're married for a certain amount of years and you decide to cheat on me, then one of the other spouses gets a kind of a windfall. It's basically saying, okay, what's the price of you having this fling? Usually you have to prove that the person is actually guilty of it. And with technology these days, they usually have proof. But this infidelity clause can make the other person come out on a higher end despite whatever else was happening. And so that's what happened with the Tiger Woods case. His ex-wife ended up having a pretty good settlement because he was guilty of infidelity, and that was part of the prenuptial agreement. So the infidelity clause is supposed to motivate the other spouse to not cheat. But honestly, if a person wants to cheat, they're going to cheat. They're not going to be thinking about logical or prenuptial agreements when they're in the sheets. Okay, so let's talk about the divorce rate in the United States. Currently, the divorce rate is almost 40%. So that means out of 10 marriages, about 4 of them will fail, which is kind of scary. And then it kind of varies from state to state too. So as you'll notice, Nevada has a really high divorce rate, and that's where Las Vegas is. So, a lot of people get married on the whim and then they reconsider, like, what did we just do? And that probably explains why their rate is higher than the rest of the country. Also, I think there's something called the 7-year itch. A lot of marriages ended up end in the 7-year because people, I guess, change or they have a different feeling about their spouse by the time they get to the 7th year. Whatever the reason is why people get divorced, the likelihood of people getting divorced is, like I said, for every 10 people, 4 people will get divorced. So you want to make sure you plan ahead. Prenuptial agreements are not a sexy or romantic topic, but it's definitely one you should talk about with your potential mate before you get married. Personally, I used to think that a prenuptial agreement says, dang, you have no faith in the marriage. It almost jinxes the marriage because you say, okay, this is going to happen when we get divorced. But it really is a matter of like, this will happen if we get divorced. I want to go ahead and protect certain things at this point if it happens. So I mentioned before that prenuptial agreements are not just for the celebrities or the rich. The average person may want to protect their interests. They may want to protect their interests of generations after them, protect inheritances, life insurance, things of that nature. And so how much does it actually cost to do this? And like I mentioned before, you need to have your own attorney. Each person has their own attorney representing their interests in the prenuptial agreement. And so on average, it can cost as low as sometimes $500 per each person. If you don't have a lot of assets or debts, but enough that you want to protect, it may cost as low as $500. But if you have a lot more things, a lot more assets, a lot more debts you want to consider, the prenuptial agreement is going to be more detailed, and therefore the cost of drafting one and hiring an attorney to draft one is going to cost more. I wouldn't leave it up to yourself to try to draft your own on LegalZoom or something like that, just because you might not have the legal eye to consider or contemplate things in the future that an attorney who is experienced in that particular specialty would be able to let you know about and say, hey, you want to protect these things in the future. And so these are the things, like I said, you can put aside a certain amount of money and talk to your potential mate about drafting an agreement so that you guys can protect your own interests. Even without a prenuptial agreement in place, there are certain things in the law that protect marriages that end in divorce. Let's say if you've been married for over 10 years, your ex can still be entitled to some of your Social Security benefits, or they still can be entitled to alimony payments if you reach over the 10-year mark. So I believe in love. I don't want this to discourage anyone from getting married because they're saying, oh, I need to protect my interests. We got to put something in writing. But in reality, when things get to the end and divorce happens, no matter how agreeable you think you may be or your spouse may be, they might not be as agreeable at the end. And so you want to make sure that you're covered.